Hello students, this is Dr. Carol Smith and this is a short recording for English 102, section 21187 for fall 2015. In place of our live session today, I am going to be walking you through a few resources to help you with integrating your sources and any citations that you might need to complete for your current assignment. As you are evaluating a particular source for its argument and you're developing a rhetorical analysis, you are going to want to cite specific small quotations and references from the source in order to support your discussion of elements and strategies that you see the author using. So to go over how to integrate your sources and properly cite them so that they will refer back to your works cited page at the end of your paper, you'll want to go into the modules link. And when you go into modules, you can of course toggle some of these other modules open and closed as you wish. And then in particular, in addition to the library resources, you have a special documenting and crediting sources resource module here. This is the one that we're going to be working with today. So first of all, you'll notice that there's a plagiarism game. You might want to check that out. There is a link to a PowerPoint on how to use EasyBib. That's a free MLA citation tool to help you organize and set up your MLA citations at the end of your paper. What we are going to look at more particularly today, however, is how to actually integrate your sources into your paper. So we're going to take a look at tips for parenthetical citation, and we're going to look at, there's an audio video lesson here, but I'm going to take a look at the PowerPoint lesson today so that I can walk you through a little bit of it here. And then you can either come back to this or come back to the audio video lesson for more intensive instruction. The other kinds of things that I want you to notice: you have a sample MLA paper, you have a citation guide to help you cite particular types of resources, there's a game involved, there's also a review sheet, and then you also have some tips for how to effectively paraphrase or sum up what someone has said as well. So we're not going to be emphasizing this quite as much on this particular paper as we will for future papers. For the most part, most of your discussion will be summarizing what the author has said in your own words and then quoting specific examples. So for example, if you find an example of how the author establishes credibility, then you might want to cite particular phrases, particular examples or illustrations that show that. So with that in mind, let's go into the tips for parenthetical citation very quickly. And easiest way to view this is to actually right-click on it and download it so that you can view it outside of Canvas. You can view it embedded within Canvas as well, but this makes it a slightly bigger screen. You can play with it. You can also download it so that you can reference it and look at it again outside of class. So we're going to go to slideshow and from beginning, and then let's go from here. So first of all, parenthetical or in-text documentation. We document sources in order to give credit to the original source. If we don't, then we consider that plagiarism because we're not representing others' work as our own in that regard. So we want to be sure to give credit where credit is due. We document to show readers where to obtain the information, and we also document to responsibly indicate where source material begins and ends. If we disagree, let's say we're building an argument, if we disagree with an author, then it becomes very important that we distinguish the author's point of view from our own. So for the particular essay that you are developing right now, the rhetorical analysis, you aren't going to be incorporating your opinion about the issue, but you are going to be incorporating and supporting an opinion about how effectively that particular author builds his or her argument. So some things to kind of remember about what to document: facts, statistics, graphics, anything that is borrowed in whole or in part from another source, a claim, an opinion, a statement that is borrowed from another source, and that includes direct word-for-word quotations that we enclose in quotation marks, anything that we summarize in our own words or paraphrase in our own words from a source we also give credit to. So here's a kind of a bottom line. Whether you're summarizing, paraphrasing, or directly quoting an author's exact words, you need to clearly identify and credit the author and source. So how are we going to do that? Well, here's one example of how we can incorporate a citation. The first example is an example where the author has not been introduced. Most of the time we want to introduce the author. It's a good idea to have a signal phrase at the beginning to do so. But sometimes if we're kind of continuing a discussion and we at least have a leading phrase that kind of tells us that we're about to cite, such as according to a study conducted by the Institute of Health, that still gives us a signal phrase to indicate that what follows is going to be a citation. Then sometimes we can get by with just the parenthetical citation here. But in most cases, especially when we are introducing information, we want to introduce the author and give us a little, give the reader a little bit of context for understanding where the information came from. So here's an example of where the author has been introduced. In a study conducted by Robert Katz at the Institute of Health in Los Angeles, researchers found that nearly 80% of all school-age children under the age of 10 are exposed to over 15 hours of television programming per week. Now notice that for this, there are no direct quotes around this. This is something that the author has gone in and they have made certain that they understood exactly what the author intended to say, and then they have reworded it in their own words. This means totally in your own words, your own vocabulary, your own sentence style and structure. You don't want to follow chronologically, and you don't want to just substitute words here or there. It needs to be entirely in your own words. We also call the signal phrase an attribution phrase to introduce the source. And then here's how we want to cite. If we have mentioned the author in our introduction, in our attribution phrase or signal phrase, then all we need to reference is the page number where the information was found, or in most cases, sometimes we don't have page numbers anymore, then we reference the first keyword or two of the title of the article where that information came from. If we did not mention the author before our citation, then we do include the last name of the author and then either the page number or the first keyword or two again of the title of the article that it came from. Now this does not mean that we cite Katz New York Times. New York Times is not the title of the article. New York Times is the title of the larger work within which there is an article. So we want to go for the article title, whatever that might be. Okay, now here's another example of how important it is to make certain that we are incorporating citations. Now, for your particular paper, you're going to be mostly talking about what you see going on in the paper in terms of ethos, pathos, and logos. So you're going to be pointing to specific examples and saying, in this essay, Susan Sarandon, effectively uses ethos by, and then give some examples. And then when you get the examples, then you're going to want to point to some explanation on your part as to how and why that seems to work effectively or not. So think of P, I, and E, point, illustrate, and explain. In this particular case, we have an example of why it's important to make certain that we do have those citations. So here we have a reference to a study conducted by the Institute of Health, which is similar to what we looked at before, and this is from Katz. Well, then the next citation is not from Katz, it's actually from Haber. So notice that we have an attribution that actually introduces that next citation, and it kind of draws a comparison. Studies conducted prior to Katz's 1999 research indicate that. So now we know that this is before cats, and we're introducing somebody else's ideas. And then we move back to talking about the cat study. So this is also going back to that, that particular author again. So normally we wouldn't stack things like this, but it's a good example of how and why it is important to show where the citations begin and end, and how and why having a good attribution or a signal phrase at the beginning of each citation becomes very important. Okay, so this is what you're going to be doing the most of. You're going to be introducing the author, and you're going to be talking about what particular element or strategy you see going on, and then you're going to be giving an example. So here, Jefferson Fish, a citizen and advocate for the legalization of drugs, cites one proposal which recommended that federal drug prohibition statutes be repealed, etc. Right? So notice that that is word for word from the source. So we need to enclose that in quotations, and then in parentheses we either put the page number or we put the keyword or two, first keyword or two to indicate the title of the article. If we've already mentioned the author here. Otherwise, we will put the author's last name here. So for instance, in your essay, you might say Jefferson Fish, uses pathos just a little bit too much, and it actually detracts from the logical reasoning of his argument, for example. And then you would give an example and then explain how that fits into your analysis. So we have an explanation afterward to show the relevance of the quotation that you are dealing with. Okay, longer quotes for your essay right now, you aren't going to need to deal with. So this is just kind of for reference. If you were to use a more lengthy quote that is maybe longer than 3 or 4 lines of text, then you would indent 0.5 from the 1-inch margin. And there's an example of that here, but for right now, you are not going to be doing that. And this is an example of how it would look if you were to do that. Okay, so we've kind of gone over just a couple of really quick examples of how to integrate your sources. You want to make certain that, first of all, you have a signal phrase or some sort of attribution phrase to introduce what you are talking about and to introduce the author. In your case, since you're dealing, most of you, with just one author, once you introduce the author, and say in this particular piece, the author, appropriately uses ethos, pathos, and logos in the following ways, then from there, as you talk about the different strategies, you want to introduce the source information that illustrates the point you're trying to make, and then explain how it does that. So again, let's say that the author uses a good deal of humor to kind of alleviate maybe the discussion of a very serious issue. Then you may have, 2 or 3 quotes that illustrate how the author does that in a number of ways. So you could say, for example, in paragraph 2 of page 2, the author states, quote it, cite it, and then say, here's how this works. In this particular passage, the author is attempting to, and this has this particular effect. Maybe it has a positive effect, maybe it has a negative effect, maybe it doesn't work because it doesn't seem logical. You are the critic, so you evaluate that information. Okay, so to avoid plagiarizing what you're summarizing, make certain that you stay organized. Make certain that you use note cards to take notes and to identify particular quotations that you are going to use to help support your argument about how effectively or ineffectively the author is building his or her argument. When citing your information by paraphrasing or summing up in your own words, do restate in your own words completely. That does not mean that you can get away with not citing, however. You still need an attribution phrase. You still need the parenthetical citation at the end. And then paraphrase information at the time you take your notes. Make certain that you make a note of what you're paraphrasing and what you're quoting. I usually put like a P next to what I'm paraphrasing and then, create the citation right there. Or I put a Q next to what I'm going to be citing, and I enclose that in quotes right away. I even write my attribution phrases or possible attribution phrases in my notes so that I have it ready to go and ready to integrate into my source. So that's just a quick overview. There are more resources that are available to you in the documentation site, but that will get you started, and I'm sure you'll have questions as we go along during the week. So please go ahead and contact me as you need help. Take care and have a great day.